Welcome back, writers, to the Inspired Writer Collective podcast. Today, it is just the two of us, Elizabeth and Stephanie, but we're going to be talking about this concept around this awful term in writing, marketing. Except we're going to reframe it, and Stephanie's been working on this cool project to help us as publishing authors, as traditional publishing authors, indie publishing authors, reframe how it is that we're showing up online, what that looks like, what you really need to be doing, and hopefully demystify some of that, and also maybe remove some of the blockages or resistance that you naturally feel when someone tells you, you have to market your book, you have to market your book. So Stephanie, please share with our audience what you've been working on and how everyone can apply this concept to how they're showing up either online or in real life as they're sharing about their upcoming book, their published book, or simply their idea that they're rattling around in their head.
Yeah, so I'm super excited about this shift, even for me, around marketing, because if you've been listening for a little while, and I talk about my love-hate relationship with showing up online, and I wrestle with how to put myself out there. And so as I've been designing this upcoming program that I'm launching at the end of May, I kept thinking the word marketing creates such resistance. It creates this oh my goodness, I have to, as a writer, put on a completely different hat and do a completely different thing. And as I've been brainstorming and writing all of my ideas down and thinking, what came to me is this idea of not needing to separate the two, that what you're already doing in your writing can naturally contribute to how you show up in the world. And now that other piece around social media is really, that's also a choice of yours, because there are different ways that you can go out and market your book that don't involve social media. So there's kind of this spectrum where you can put yourself on as to how much you want to show up. But what I've created is this idea around a flow between what you're already writing on the page and how you can notice as you're writing. Maybe there's a line that you're like, oh, this is really fun, or an idea, or a scene idea, or how you came to an idea, or even just a picture of your writing space, or how you choose to write every day. Or maybe you choose not to write every day and you have a completely different schedule. Or maybe, I think about all the pictures I have on my camera roll of when I've been writing at coffee shops that I haven't shared. And I think to myself, okay, that's something that I can so easily share without it creating friction for me. Because one, my face is not in it if I don't want my face to be in it all the time. And two is, somebody out there is going to relate to it, or somebody out there is going to want to hear about it. And I think one of the things that can happen so often when we're writing and we're in our spaces and we're in our stories and we're writing is we forget readers are actually really curious about what writers do. And that's something that also became really apparent to me recently in different conversations I've had with people around why I'm a romance writer. And oftentimes I don't always want to share that because there's this idea around, well, that's not really writing. And there's this piece that I have from when I was younger where I was told those aren't really books, which isn't true because there's some of the top performing books out there in terms of reader consumption. And it's been interesting because people have said, oh, I'm really curious about how do you do what you do? And just even simply answering that question in the way that you show up creates a flow between you're already doing it. So you don't have to stop what you're doing. You just find ways to then share it in little pieces. And so it really created this mental shift for me. Because the other piece that when I started talking about this in our email newsletters is I was talking about it as embodied marketing, which I love this whole frame around embodied and the somatic experience, and the writing is in the body. And all of a sudden I thought, that word marketing is really a sticking point for so many. And so I did some word playing and I came up with this idea of the Unbound Story System, that there isn't a boundary to it, that what you're doing already is naturally going to flow into how you're showing up online.
I love that. Yeah, I find I do experience such a resistance when I feel like I'm switching my brain and I'm like, okay, now I've written the book, or it's now with my proofreaders, I'm getting ready to publish. And I'm like, okay, I should do some marketing. What should I say about my book? And then it's just like brain freeze, right? I don't know what to say. I mean, you can look at prompts, but I'm just like, I don't like that. I feel resistance. It feels icky. I don't love it, right? And so I love some of the things that you've brought up, Stephanie, about the ways that we can just talk about our everyday process, which I will say, pat on the back for myself, I do tend to post videos like that on Instagram Reels. I do share about where I am in my writing journey, even if I don't have like a published book for people to buy yet. I've talked about the memoir writing process. I've talked about, beta reader feedback. I've talked about a number of these different steps. And so I have to remember to give myself credit that also counts as marketing. We hear about marketing, right? And it's always linked to this, like you do this and then you have a call to action. Right. And if you're not having a call to action, then you're not really marketing. But there's this whole other aspect, especially with writing. But I think there are probably other professions where people are curious about what's really going on behind the scenes. I had a decade-long career as a forensic scientist, and there's so much misconception about what that day-to-day role actually looks like. So I'm sure people would be very interested to get a behind-the-scenes perspective. Actually, it's kind of like a plug for our upcoming stuff. In June is when I will be doing my pre-sales and my publication of my book. And all of those episodes for the Mondays in June are going to be short little behind the scenes of a writer, me publishing their first book and all the considerations and things. And so it makes sense when I think about like the podcast and like developing content for the podcast, but it's so helpful to then think, oh, I can do something very similar via, short videos for reels or posts or whatever. And it does count as marketing. And I think we as writers get into our heads about what it's supposed to be. It feels really different from where we live in our creative flow while we're writing. And I love that you're helping me see that we don't have to necessarily view it as a totally separate endeavor. It's just an extra layer of like, oh, should I maybe hit record real quick? Or should I maybe, copy and paste this line that I just wrote that's kind of fun or would drum up interest and put it on a Canva post that I can put up later? It's just one other step, not this whole other like brain map and idea and concept and call to action that you have to do. I think demystifying it a little bit by saying like, okay, you're already doing everything. Like you're already generating the content you need. You just have to figure out what works for you as far as how to share it, whether you're sharing it as reflections in your email, whether you're sharing, quickly taking a video or a photo, like you said, while you're at coffee shops working. Last summer, I got some of my old writing from my mom that she had saved from like 4th grade and stuff. And so I've been saving that for when I can put it next to my book and be like, I went from here to here. Like, how cool was that to like see that journey? And I want to just quickly jump back to the marketing session of our memoir summit. And the marketing tips that our guest panelists shared was not just limited to memoir, but there were just some really key points made by the panelists. Like Lindsay said, a book is new to anyone who hasn't read it before, because I think we really get in our heads of like, how do I say something different about what I'm doing? How do I say something different about this book? Without remembering that like most of the people who are going to see that post or that reel probably haven't seen your other stuff before. Mm-hmm. And even if they have, it's just a good reminder. So like you can go ahead and like list those, romance tropes again or dig into one more specifically. You don't always have to make it brand new. You can simply like say again why you got started doing this project, why it's meaningful to you. I also really loved when Hannah shared that the purpose of the marketing and when you're going to actually sell your final book once it's ready and published, is that you're helping readers discover a story that already matters to them. And that was such a relief. I remember like feeling that like sigh of relief, and the chat just went wild during the summit when she said that, because it just unlocked this different mindset that you don't have to convince everyone that this story is for them. You just have to share enough about the story that those who it's for know that it's for them and find them. You don't have to convince anyone. You're not trying to, it's not the same as like selling a face cream where you have to convince them like, this is why you need this in your life and your skin will look so much better once you have this. You don't have to do that. You just tell them what the story is about. And if it's for them, they'll be able to see that. If anyone missed that summit, we did record it, and you can purchase those recordings for all of the 5 sessions. Each one was like 45 minutes a piece, and those you can purchase via our website if you wanted to know more and dig into either that marketing session or any of the others we had that day.
Well, and I think you bring up a really great point with sharing those quotes around just the whole idea of how we connect as humans. We connect through story. When you're having a conversation with someone or you meet someone for the first time, you connect through common interests, common stories, common ideas, all those pieces that I think we're forgetting about as our world becomes so inundated with AI, and it's hard to tell when you're online, especially on social media, like, is that real? Is it not real? And the beauty of being a writer is you're sharing your humanness. You're sharing who you are as a human, and humans are desperately seeking those connections these days. I don't know if anybody else is feeling that, but I think as technology speeds up and the world is in chaos and we're all feeling a bit untethered and uncertain, that we really want that human connection in these moments. And I think that that's one of the things to think about when you think nobody's going to want to hear what I have to share. Nobody's going to care. And that's the mindset to shift, because people will care when you start to show up and you start to share your story, and little pieces by little pieces, you'll start to find those connections. And Elizabeth, you've done a really incredible job with how you've been showing up. And I watch you and I think like, okay, I can do it. And then I freeze because I've gotten into this, well, I have to do it right, or I have to do it a certain way, or I have to have the right content, or I have to have the right hook, or I have to have the right line, or I have to do whatever. Mm-hmm. And really, like, you've been showing up so naturally in your process as your book is going to be coming out soon. And it's just been awesome to watch. And listeners, if you haven't gotten a chance, find Elizabeth E. Wilson Wright and check out what she's been doing, because it really is inspiring. And I think to myself, okay, this is what I'm going to start doing more of, is showing up and sharing my voice. And one of the ways that I did this just yesterday was in Columbia, Missouri, one of the indie bookstores here, Skylark Bookshop. Every year in April, they host a big book festival. And as part of that, they did a little short writing piece at the bookstore yesterday afternoon where it was, hey, if you want to join us at this time, let's have a generative writing activity as part of the conference, and invite people who want to write to a prompt and see what they can write in 40 minutes. And so a former version of myself would have been like, oh, I'm not showing up to something where I don't know anybody, and I kind of know them. I've volunteered in the past, but it's still that kind of unknown piece. I went and I wrote to the prompt, and we had to submit, and it got reviewed. And then I was invited to share. And while it wasn't related to anything I've written, not at all, it was completely different, but it was still that piece of, I'm putting my voice in a room. I'm standing up. And Elizabeth and I were talking just before recording about how, this is another example of a way that you're marketing yourself. Sure, you're not standing up in front of the room saying like, hey, you have to buy my book that's coming out whenever it's coming out, which I don't know yet, but it will be eventually. I'm working towards that. But it's still that I'm showing up in a room, I'm standing up in front of a room full of strangers, and it was a packed room. I don't know these people, and I'm standing up to read and holding a microphone and the whole thing. So those are other pieces to think about, is like, aside from online, what are other spaces where you can show up?
And I just have to give you your kudos, Stephanie, because the Stephanie I met like 3 years ago and who started doing this podcast with me like 2.5 years ago, like I would not ever imagine that like certainly it shows your evolution and being willing to put yourself out there, because that's so many people, and you're sharing something you just wrote kind of as a prompt, like didn't have time to edit or fuss over. And I hope it gave you so much confidence as a writer, that because I know you personally can get really stuck in that perfectionism, the editing, and wanting to go back and fix this and make it just right, and forgetting that like the raw initial words are good enough in some settings like this one. And you got that validation by having your piece selected to share. And like you said, your marketing, you've now strengthened your connection with that bookshop because you've already volunteered with them. Now they know your name more acutely because you were one of the people selected to read. So when you have a book ready to sell, it's more likely that they will remember you, that they'll put your book on their shelves. And then maybe some of those people who attended will recognize your name and remember your voice, even though it's a totally different story. A couple weeks ago, we had that episode come out with Anna Dow, and she talked a lot about how she doesn't use social media really to promote her book, but she shows up and she does readings. And when she does these readings, she sells most of the books she brings with her. Like she had gone and done a reading, and I think she brought 10 books and she sold 8 of them that night. There's something so powerful about sharing your voice. So much so that all the big companies have started to change their marketing. This has been going on for a couple of years now, to where like you think you're just watching a normal reel where someone's sharing a story, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, this is a marketing ploy. They're using story to sell me, this supplement or this workout thing or whatever. Because story is that powerful. And so we, as writers, already have that going for us, because we don't have to craft a story on top of our story. We are already the story, and we are already writing the story. So it's simply about repurposing those things. You don't have to reinvent anything.
Well, and the other piece that I'm sure probably comes up a little bit is that fear around, well, but if I share parts of my story, what if somebody takes my idea? What if somebody steals it? I know everybody is worried about intellectual property. And I think one of the pieces to remember is that when you share little pieces, if somebody takes your idea, you've just inspired them in some way. You've just given them a starting point. They don't have the entire architecture of your book. They don't have your lived experience that's coming into what you're writing. They don't have the dialogue that's missing from the scene. They don't have the bigger picture, the overarching idea, or whatever all of those pieces are. Because really, when you think about it, you go into a bookstore and everything's been done. But what hasn't been done is your way, your voice, your way of telling the story. And I think that's another point to remember when you think about showing up for yourself and putting your story out there and putting your work out there, is to not think like, well, if I share some of my book in an email, somebody's going to take it. No, the person who is connecting with you, they get excited because they're like, oh, I got a little sneak peek, or, oh, it teases a little bit where they're like, oh, I wonder what will be shared next week or next time. Like, will I get a little bit more? And so little breadcrumbs are dropped. Because let's be real, most people out there who are consuming stuff on Instagram and Threads and all those platforms, like nobody's spending a lot of time thinking about like, oh, I'm going to take this and I'm going to do something with it. No, like everybody's scrolling through. It's a passive activity as they're waiting at the doctor's office or waiting in the carpool line or whatever it is where you're consuming that. And so definitely don't let this fear of, well, if I start sharing it, then it's going to take away from what I actually publish. No, not at all. It's just laying little seeds, and you're starting to grow those seeds and allowing people to connect with your voice, your idea, And that's why this idea of the unbound story system, that there isn't a boundary from what you're already creating to what you're putting out there. It's just a seamless way and framework of thinking about, oh, I can already use the creative pieces that have on paper here. And
yeah, and the other thing that I do sometimes with the content that I make is I also will share when something inspires me. So there's a lot of times I'll be watching like a Netflix movie. Like there was the one that came out over a year ago about the writer, and she's going on this like writing retreat, and then she ends up like losing her manuscript that she's been working on, and so there was all sorts of struggles to the writer journey, and there was all sorts of leaning heavy into the writer trope that like, you know, that I was able to play off of to make some content, and talked about how it inspired me to create a backup copy of my manuscript at that point. I even watched a documentary this last week that I have yet to make a reel about, but I plan to. And it was one of the newer ones on Netflix with Noah Kahn, the singer-songwriter from Vermont, and how much like memoir his writing style is, and how his family was talking about how, like, as they hear his music, they know exactly what events he's talking about, exactly what situation he's singing about, because he's being so specific. But it's those specifics that are universal, because as a listener of his music, I am not at all thinking about his family dynamics. I'm thinking about how they compare to mine or my upbringing or the ways that I miss home. And so there's so many things that you can share too about not just what you're doing in hopes of inspiring others, but even revealing what's inspiring you in the moment. Like, did you hear another reader, you know, at that session that you were at, Stephanie, that inspired you and made you think about something in a different way? Because, you know, you were all given the same prompt, but you got to see how everyone's brains took it in a different direction. I think stuff like that is also really cool, and we can be sharing that as well.
Well, yeah, and since you mentioned the prompt, I'll just share it quickly in case anybody listening is curious, or maybe you want to take this prompt yourself. But it was an opening line to use, and it was, there was a reason I wasn't supposed to open the box. And what was interesting there were so many different ways that different writers in the group had taken it. And while some of the stories were very similar, there were several around the ashes of somebody who had passed and opening a box that had the urn and, you know, or just the plastic bag with ashes, and, you know, what were they going to do with these? And so there were varying levels. And so one prompt, but it brings out different stories. And I love what you shared too about Noah Kahn, and it makes me think about, you know, how Taylor Swift is very vocal about her writing process. And recently she received an award, and her thing was about working at her craft and continuously showing up. And that story comes in so many different forms, and using that as inspiration. I know one of the things that we've talked about in episodes way back, and definitely in the episode when we were reading Shelley Reed's book, Go as a River, that the influence of poetry and how much that can inspire you. So maybe there's a poem that you come across that gives you an idea, and like sharing that poem even as something. And like I said, there are just so many different ways that you can decide how you want to show up. And again, for me, creating this idea around a flow between what I'm already creating and what I'm putting out there, it's light bulbs going off. For some reason, reframing the language for myself, reframing the perspective has just brought it into a whole new lens of how I see myself moving forward. And that's what I'm so excited to share with all of you writers who are listening. And if you're interested in joining this program or learning more about it, there's a link below to hop on my calendar. You can reply to the email if you're on our email list, or get on our email list, connect with us. And the other really cool thing is that you can send us text messages from your podcast app, and we can now respond to those text messages. That's a whole new feature that we just learned about in the last week or so. And it's so exciting. How easy is that? You text every day already. So why not send us a text? We've gotten some before, but we were so frustrated because we couldn't respond. But now we can respond to you. So that's even easier than all of the above that I just listed. Like right now in your podcast app, send us a text. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what you're thinking, and happy writing.